So I find myself this Yom Kippur doing something I've never done. Actually, recanting a sermon, something I said to you last year in the same space and time. Well, maybe it's not a full recanting, but, well, let me tell you more. Last Yom Kippur, if some of you were there, if not, I'll update you. I spoke about racial justice and the importance and need for us as a community to learn and involve ourselves in this work. I asked the question, as Jews, well, what color are we? Now, racial justice, certainly for the past few years, has been something that we as a community have felt to be important. In 2016, before the election, we began some work reading Coates' book, Between the World and Me. And as we did that reading and reflection, well, the election of 2016 happened and other things demanded our attention. But last year we revisited, as I said, I spoke to you about the subject, and we began some more work, some workshops, some reading, some studying to see how we may participate in this work. And during that sermon, during that time, well, I asked the question, what color are we Jews? And I told you a story of being in something involved in our neighborhood in Park Hill, called Real Park Hill, that happened, I think, about 6 or 7 years ago. Park Hill, as is known, as the story it's told about itself, is an integrated community, that there are people of color who live all through the neighborhood. And colleagues of mine, clergy colleagues, sought to take advantage of that and begin some meetings where we would meet and listen and learn. I told the story of being in a room with no other rabbis, but Christian colleagues, some white, some black, and hearing the black colleagues talk about their experience, about being oppressed and experiencing prejudice. And as a Jew, somewhat understanding and feeling simpatico with that. And then hearing my white colleagues talk about how they've not experienced this and their feelings and reactions to hearing those stories and being a white person, and I understood that too. And I came away from the sermon kind of walking that line and saying, well, we're a bit of both. That we Jews know what it's like to be black in a certain extent. And here in 5781 in 2020, with the events and discussion and discourse, I don't believe that anymore. I want to distance myself from that idea. Not from our work of racial justice and learning and understanding, but my statement, my understanding where I, as a Jew, sit along this spectrum. We speak of white fragility, maybe it's even Jewish fragility. That there are ways when we hear these discussions that we rationalize and put ourselves, well, it's not me. I'm not racist. I don't say racist things or do racist things, so it's not something I own. And especially in a Jewish way, we say, oh, well, we've experienced persecution and oppression. We understand. We're not quite as white or even as responsible as the rest of the truly, fully white people are. And I'm not so sure anymore. Actually, I am sure. We are. I think this time of year calls upon us to do the hard work of knowing our foibles, our flaws, our limitations, our accountability. And there's a layer of that we do and say, yeah, maybe I should be more honest more often. Or I should be better about exercising or things like that. And those are all well and good and important. But there's a deeper, more challenging, more raw level of that work. To see and feel our true accountability, our connectivity in how the world works. Even if the primal cause of action of hurt and pain was not our action, but we have participation in its consequences. I have a very embarrassing story to tell. And it feels like this, it fits this moment. I love my grandparents dearly. They were some of the people who I modeled my Jewish ideals and values after, and they were flawed too. I wonder how they'd be in this moment, because the story I want to tell, my brothers and I were with them in southern Florida on a trip. My parents weren't there. We were driving around, I don't know, going somewhere. And we passed through a small town, people selling stuff by the side of the road, and the sign said what they were selling, fruit, vegetables, and whatnots. Now, my brothers and I had never heard this term before, whatnots. And we asked my grandparents. Well, it just so happened the people working these stalls were black. They were people of color. We asked my grandparents, well, what are whatnots? They said, oh, well, it's them. It's the black people. Those are whatnots. And we had a good laugh, and embarrassingly, that became a term for people of color in my grandparents' household, in my family. As I think about that story and just the feelings of guilt, of shame, for them, for me, it reminds me of my accountability, my part I play in this racism, in this injustice in our world. I have not known, as a white Jewish man, anything equivalent to what a black man my age may have experienced in our country. The fear, the worry, the concerns, the things to think about are not mine at all. And I think it's important for me, and perhaps too if you want to consider, that I don't walk this line. I know white privilege. I experience white fragility. And even though I never enslaved anyone, nor my ancestors, because they weren't even here, that I am part of this problem. And I want to be part of the solution. Today in Yom Kippur, we will recite our confessional, our vidui. And even last year during the sermon, I made note of this. The idea that when we recite it, the Hebrew that we say, the English that we translate, does not say, I have sinned, I've done this. It's we. It's the first person plural that we have accountability. And I'm sure I've said through the years when we start this prayer that we live together in community and we have this obligation to one another and this responsibility. And talk about that connectivity. But I understand it in a new way when we say this. Because when we list those sins, there are certain things that I have done, but there's others that I have not done at all. And in a corner of my mind, thinking feels like, yeah, that's not really me, but I'm going to say the we for community. But this historical moment about racial injustice and the tragedy of George Floyd and all the others of whose names we must say to me, I don't think that's what the we of Vidui is all about. That even though I didn't do those things, I have some responsibility and accountability. I don't know what to do about it. Maybe the first step is just acknowledging that connectedness, that participation. I think about the wonderful aspen groves or clones that populate our beautiful state. Many of you may know that all those aspen trees are not individual organisms. we look at them and we see that they are all these beautiful individual trees with their white bark and their leaves and how they shimmer with the wind comes. But below, all the roots are connected and they form one organism. I can't help but to think of them when I think about our vidui, our role as Jews, as white Jews, in this moment of fighting and confronting racism and racial injustice. That it may seem to us that we are separate as a community or individuals, but it just ain't so. We are deeply interwoven, and even if that tree over there, maybe the branch is broken, maybe some leaves are sick, and we say, oh, that's that other tree. No. We are all part of the same organism, the same community. And the quicker we get our heads and hearts around that, the sooner we can begin doing this work. And like I said, it's so complex, it's so big. I wish I can say, here are the 3 things to go do. But in my heart of hearts, what I believe, the first thing we can do is to begin this process of understanding, of seeing our place in it all. Last year when I gave this sermon, I told the story of a moment where I felt the best of this connectedness. And I still think it expresses what it is, what we strive to be about. It was that awful day of the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh a couple of years ago, when a madman, a lunatic, walked into a synagogue and just began shooting. It was Saturday morning, and after services, people had begun to check their phones and even come to temple and say, did you hear, did you know? What would happen after that began, move me, touch me, and it captured what I think it is we strive for. Didn't know quite what to make of it, but as I walked outside on the Saturday morning, the building's quiet and empty. And I walked outside of my office and closed up the building. There was a police car sitting right in front of mine on the street. I thought, police car here. Is there something I should know? But I walked up to the officer and said, identified myself and wondered why, asked what was going on. And he just said to me, we're here for you. We heard that happen, and we wanted to be here and help you feel safe. The next morning, Sunday morning, I came for a religious school educational program, as I often do, to welcome our kids and teachers. It's also Sunday morning, so the church was in full session. And usually on Sunday morning, I walk through and say hello to people here from church, our wonderful Park Hill United Methodist Church, an integrated church with white people and black people and people of color. As I came in that morning, I didn't have to reach out to a person because they all came up to me. And they came up to me and some said nothing, just held my hand, or just hugged me, or just said, Rabbi, we're with you, we're thinking of you. And they were Christian and white and black and male and female. As I struggled with what this means to figure out this injustice, this institutional racism and my part in it, that moment, that story, what happens here in this place just feels like the response. Just feels like where we're moving to, what we need to build on. So I ask you, on this day we list our sins, that we do it in the first person plural, that we all dig down deep. However we identify ourselves, whatever we look like on the outside, and look down deep to our roots and see our connectedness. And not to be put off by the illusion of our separateness, that we seem like trees who are all different and not connected. That we remember that, and remember our accountability, our responsibility, our obligation, and our opportunity to do the work, to pursue justice, to pursue peace. I think that begins with loving, with listening, with paying attention. I hope and pray that these 10 days have been meaningful, that you return, and that we emerge into the new year ready to do the work, ready to embrace and embody the connectedness that is the true nature of not just we Jews, but we human beings. Amen.